Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Life is uncertain. It's okay to feel stressed, anxious, worried, or frustrated. It's normal. With CalHope's free and secure mental health resources, it's easy to get the help you and your loved ones need when you need it the most. Call our warm line at 833-317-4673 or live chat at calhope.org today.
Dr. Travis Brown, what is This Medical Life all about?
This is the pursuit of knowledge as we learn about diseases from the ancient times to the present day. These are the stories of medicine.
I almost need some classical music for this opening, Dr. Travis Brown, because I feel like I'm being led into the unknown. You've got that little Cheshire cat grin about you. I'm assuming this is some sort of trust exercise.
This is one of the really enjoyable parts of this podcast is I get to do episodes like this. And this is the historical autopsy of Beethoven. But with these kind of episodes, I get to, transport myself back to the time or, see what they were seeing. And in this case, maybe experience what Beethoven experienced.
The title for this episode should have been Eine kleine Nacht Autopsy.
Well, soon you'll have to explain to me what that means, but
Okay.
I don't know what. Look, this is looking at Beethoven. Now, he is one of the greats. He will be just a remarkable person. And one of the things that I wanted to do is actually go back in time and see what he saw, and feel what he felt. Mm-hmm. And this is honestly one where you can do it. And this is sort of, I wanted to look at music as medicine. And the first part of this is, look, let's do an experiment. We'll do an experiment with you and with our listeners. And I want to demonstrate the limitations of medicine.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So now, do you enjoy music?
By the way, this is a podcast for GPs and specialists. Just remember your audience. All right. Okay. So what was the question?
Do you enjoy music?
I love it.
You love it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what music do you love?
Leonard Cohen. Anything Leonard Cohen's done. I do like jazz. I like blues. I like some classical. Story songs grab me. Yep. I even have a soft spot every now and then for a bit of country, contemporary country. How about that?
Now, is there music that you don't enjoy?
Yes, anything with yodeling. I think that's a bridge too far. Not a big fan of punk. They jar.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm going to play you 3 clips, and I just want you, one at a time, and I want to get what you're feeling, what your experience is of this piece.
All right, let's have a listen. Okay. You want to know what I felt or imagined?
Yeah.
It had a cinematic feel to it of dread, but more anticipatory dread, as if the hero has come out of some dark forest and has behold before her or him this eerie new place they're about to enter, for which they need to be on guard and ready. And there's little moments of hope that are threaded through it, but they're quickly chastened by the fact that there's also danger potentially lurking. The unknown.
Let's play clip 2.
Oh, right. Okay. Here we go. Well, that was clearly, and I wonder if we've been taught this. That was in the key of sadness. That music. I actually pictured a despondent Beethoven sitting at the piano next to a window in one of those manors, and it's raining. Well, you can't really see outside. It's just rain hitting the windows, and he's just sitting there playing with melancholy.
And the third clip.
Are there proper answers for this?
No.
You've got that look. Okay. All right, let's have a listen. That is the sweet spot. That's one of my most favourite types of music. That's New Orleans jazz, and it has got that slide to it, which could suggest that you're a few bottles deep into some Jim Beam or whatever might be the case, but not in a but still in a fairly reputable and just buoyant, if not buoyant state of mind, but happy to go with the flow as you're walking through the streets of New Orleans at 3 a.m. and not feeling a moment's tiredness or care or angst, just bliss, subdued bliss.
Yeah. And here's the thing about that. Music is emotional. There is a connection. And the whole point behind it is people listen to music to enjoy it. Sometimes they use it to express themselves. There's a variety of reasons, and it expresses mood. But here's the problem. How do you measure that impact?
Oh.
So whilst you've said what you feel, how I, as an objective observer, measure that?
Were you able to?
No. And that's the point. And so, we can't measure emotions. We can measure response. How much did you like that? And you can say, I really enjoyed that, or I didn't. I loved it. I hated it.
You could tell no difference in my levels of enjoyment?
I can, but how do I measure that?
Okay.
And so and if you think about this from a medical perspective and from a scientific perspective, we don't often in studies of patient, experiences, or, when we're actually measuring someone's reaction to a disease or their improvement of a disease, we don't measure how the patients feel.
There is a self-reporting scale they can use, but even then, that's subjective on their part, isn't it?
Exactly, and that's when you think about it. In today, we actually, it won't be in the abstract. Could you imagine actually reading a scientific journal that turns around and says, and it made the patients feel pretty good? Like it's not even a mention. There is one or two areas where it is measured, but this is where we're actually measuring your mood. So antidepressants,
right.
Mood stabilizers. We are going to try and give you a medication to stabilize that. So that is an express time when we're trying to change and measure your mood.
Is this where an MRI scan would be rolled out by some well-funded researchers?
Well, again, it's what does blood movement or this lighting up of a brain area mean? And so this is the whole point with medicine: is we can talk about things like, quality of life, but measuring that is really, really hard. And so at the end, a lot of the time, it comes as a statement, like even really weird statements, like, if people are testing this chemotherapy drug and they say that, the side effect profile was within acceptable limits. Well, what does that even mean? And it's just a really hard, adverse event. So, imagine, if someone said, you're going to take this medication, you're going to feel really bad for a while. That's the most you say, but can you say how bad? Or, it will be a tough journey. Most people felt like this. And so that's where we find music and medicine. And when I started looking into this, I realized that I'm starting to examine the fringe of what we can measure, and almost, not quite, but almost alternative medicine, music therapy type areas. And look, there's a few interesting points. Well, what can we measure then, if we can't do it in sort of the mainstream scientific journal way? And look, there are a few studies out there. We know, there was a meta-analysis of, over 400 studies that shows that music improves the immune system. How far, not quite sure, but there's an improvement in people's immune system. It reduces cortisol, which is a stress hormone. They've even used it in examples of, pediatric emergency rooms to calm the room. And it has a calming effect on people waiting in the pediatric ER. The University of Alberta, children would listen to relaxing music while an IV was inserted, and they experienced less pain. And then, oddly enough, 2/3 of the people who were listening to music, putting the IV in, found it easier. So
that is absolutely fascinating.
And look, there's, researchers in a hospital in Singapore noted that, people in palliative care appeared to experience less pain during their music therapy sessions. Now, that's interesting, but again, subjective. There's also even some research into, patients with Parkinson's syndromes that if using vibrations and vibroacoustic therapy improved their symptoms. And so it's just such a challenging area. Again, you're looking for studies that just, we found this information. There was researchers for a neonatal intensive care unit in Atlanta, and they tried 3 different types of music. Well, overall, they found that some of the children, their heart rate slowed, which was an improvement. Sucking behaviour improved, meaning they were able to feed better. And singing to babies made them remain quiet and alert. And so
it's absolutely and I wonder if the context in which you're hearing the music has effect as well, because during the recent Adelaide Fringe, at the time of recording, I saw a wonderful singer do Midnight, that beautiful song, and by Andrew Lloyd Webber. As I left and was going to my next venue, I had to use one of those public conveniences that once it shuts the door on you, pipes music. And I heard Midnight again, and it was creepy and tinny. And so I had a different... My cortisol, I'm sure, went through the roof.
And this is the experience that we can't measure. And when you think about it, imagine, as humans, we can't measure emotion, we can't measure mood in something that people would probably say is almost the most important thing of our health. Like, if I can improve your health but make you feel worse, well, what was the point? And again, that comes down to quality of life. And, they've even done, they do music therapy for children with autistic spectrum disorder. Mm-hmm. Now, there's no conclusive studies, but it shows improvements in social interactions, non-verbal communications, and parent-child relationships. There's relaxation therapy, which shows a lot of, some benefits. But again, nothing really conclusive that says, here's how beneficial it is.
Well, I used to play Leonard Cohen music to my eldest daughter when she was a babe in arms, and it dropped her off to sleep pretty darn quickly.
And it will have an effect. And this is why I explain it as a limitation of medicine. This isn't the problem with anything. It's just our ability to measure that response. And they even had things like linking it to speech, and it assists with speech with people with head injuries. The Royal College of Surgeons did it whilst minor surgery. They would have music playing, and the patient would have less anxiety as opposed to patients who didn't have any music playing. And so bringing this back to Beethoven, now music was his life, and there was a few quotes that we'll come up to that demonstrate this straight out. But could music even tell us about his symptoms? There's some articles out there that suggest that there's pieces of Beethoven's music that said, well, did he actually have a heart arrhythmia? There is, irregular beats in some of his music. There are irregular pauses. These are very much out of the ordinary of his normal works. So is this a brilliant composer who's just playing around with music? Or is this Beethoven speaking to us? Hundreds of years later, are we hearing his heart? And there's some speed up and pressured playing. Are these his palpitations? Are these possibly even Beethoven's arrhythmia? Or is he just composing?
Right, I've regrouped. I'm ready to continue as we eavesdrop on Beethoven communicating to his doctors from years ago. It's like listening in on what should be in a private confessional surgery room.
Oh, and that's the power of music. So now we'll turn to his life. And look, Ludwig van Beethoven, he was born in December 6th, 1770. Now, he was born in the small town, a German town of Bonn, and he was the second of 7 children. Only 3 of them survived beyond infancy. Now, his father was a musician himself. He was Johann van Beethoven. He was a musician, but he was also an alcoholic. And his paternal grandmother was also alcoholic. And there are quite a few stories of abuse. A drunken dad comes home, bursts in to, wake up Beethoven, Ludwig, and demands pretty much an audience, for him to play. And he would play, and he would be the demanding father. He would abuse his son if there was any mistakes, and it had to be played with either perfection or until his dad got bored. And this is of a young child who is clearly brilliant, clearly genius. And oddly enough, was of the time of Mozart. Now, Mozart lived around this time, and he was a prodigy. And so there was clearly some competitive spirit for Beethoven's father. And this manifested itself how it did. Now, from a health perspective, Beethoven got smallpox and had facial scarring from he recovered, but got those pock marks that is quite classical. He had bronchial asthma and he had recurrent chest infections. Now, his mother, at the age of 40, when Beethoven was 16, died of TB, and Ludwig became the main provider for the family. And then at the age of 21, his father died. And this is believed to be alcohol related. And look, through this time, there is significant issues, and particularly after his mother's death, then these symptoms would last for him without life. And honestly, he wasn't a fan of doctors, and you'll see, the doctors and their remedies, and you'll see in his correspondence why this is so.
Yes, back then I would have been quite on the fence myself. I love the medical profession these days, but back then, not so much.
We have some of his correspondence.
The cause of this must be the condition of my belly, which, as you know, has always been wretched and has been getting worse, since I am always troubled with diarrhea, which causes extraordinary weakness. Frank wanted to tone up my body by tonic medicines and restore my hearing with almond oil, but nothing happened. My hearing grew worse and worse, my bowels remained as they had been. This lasted until the autumn of last year, and I was often in despair. Then came a medical ass who advised me to take cold baths for my health. A more sensible one advised the usual lukewarm Danube bath. That worked wonders. My belly improved, but my deafness remained and became even worse. This last winter I was really miserable, since I had frightful attacks of colic and again fell back into my previous condition. Thus I remained until about 4 weeks ago, when I went to Währing, thinking that my condition demanded a surgeon, and besides I had great confidence in him. He succeeded almost wholly in stopping the awful diarrhea. He prescribed the lukewarm Danube bath, into which each time I had to pour a little bottle of strengthening stuff. He gave me no medicine of any kind until about 4 days ago, when he prescribed pills for my stomach and a kind of herb for my ear. Since then, I can say I'm feeling stronger and better, except that my ears sing and buzz constantly, day and night.
So this is probably almost the best encapsulation of Beethoven and his health troubles. And it goes through them all. Like his gastrointestinal symptoms, he's having sporadic colic abdominal pain, and it could be incapacitating. He had change of bowel habits and increased frequency. The interesting thing, though, and it's important to note, is we're not aware of any malabsorption problems that he's having. He doesn't have inflammatory features. Now, these episodes appear to get worse during times of stress or even depression. And what helps? Well, analgesics. He's talking about quinine. He's talking about baths and, these lukewarm river baths. And the problem is, one of the solutions that he also finds is alcohol. And so alcohol seems to be a bit of an alleviation of these symptoms for him.
I assume you're talking about taken internally, not rubbed externally.
No. He's having a drink quite a bit. And later in life, his GI symptoms continue to deteriorate.
Already from the previous year to now, I have been sick all of the time, and over the summer, jaundice as well. A full-blown attack, a disgusting disease, right till the end of August. Staudenheim sent me in September to Baden, but it was so cold that I got so violent a diarrhea that I had to come back here in a hurry.
Now, the other significant issue that crops up for Beethoven is his deafness. And this is, as we said in the first quote, that he's going deaf, and now he's continuing to compose. And this is just a remarkable ability, even at the point where most people believe that he was deaf by the time he was composing a lot of his later stuff. Now, this started at the age of 27.
If I belonged to any other profession, it would be easier. But in my profession, it is a frightful state.
And so he suffered from earaches and headaches for the rest of his life. Loud noises were painful. He had what described as tinnitus. And these symptoms became progressively worse, even to the point of Beethoven having suicidal thoughts.
If I did not know that I must do my work, I would kill myself.
And so Beethoven is also said to have two great loves after music: alcohol and womanizing. And I'm guessing they probably go hand in hand as well. And he also had a love and a family history of alcohol. And this gets quite obvious. And by the end of in the lead up to his death, his doctor ends up doing acidic taps. And over the years before his death, over 20 litres is ended up being drained from his acidic taps. It's estimated that Beethoven drank 3 bottles of wine per day, one with each meal. And on his deathbed, his publisher sent him a case of red wine. And Beethoven's last words, while he looked at that case of wine, was, "Pity, pity, too late."
The funeral took place in the afternoon of March 29th. It was one of the most imposing functions of its kind ever witnessed in Vienna. Into the square in front of his house, it is said 20,000 persons were crowded. All the notable representatives of art were present. The schools were closed. The crowd was so great that after the roomy court of Beethoven's residence could no longer hold it, the gates had to be closed until the procession moved. The coffin containing the corpse of the great composer had been placed on view in the court. After the clergy were come to perform their sacred office, the guests who had been invited to attend these solemn functions, musicians, singers, poets, actors, all clad in complete mourning, with draped torches and white roses fastened to the bands of crape on their sleeves, encircled the bier, and the choristers sang. Solemnly, sublimely, the pious tones of the glorious composition floated upwards through the silent air. The scene was imposing. The coffin with its richly embroidered pall, the clergy, the distinguished men who were given the last escort to their colleague, and the multitude round about. The coffin was now placed in the hearse drawn by 4 horses and taken to the cemetery. The grave was marked by a simple pyramid bearing the one word, Beethoven.
So when we're looking at the autopsy, it was performed a day after his death. Now, this was done by Dr. Johann Wagner, who was an experienced pathologist, really. He practiced at the Vienna Pathological Museum, and his assistant, Dr. Karl von Rokotansky, and some of the findings are here.
The corpse was very emancipated, especially in the limbs, and sewn over with black petechiae. The abdomen, which was unusually dropsied, was distended and stretched. The cavity of the chest, together with the organs within it, was in the normal condition. In the cavity of the abdomen, 4 quarts, 4 litres, of a greyish-brown turbid fluid were effused. The liver appeared shrunk up to half its proper volume, of a leathery consistence and greenish-blue colour, and was beset with knots, the size of a bean, on its tuberculated surface, as well as in its substance. All its vessels were very much narrowed and bloodless. The spleen was found to be more than double its proper size, rose-coloured and firm. The pancreas was equally hard and firm, its excretory duct being as wide as a goose quill. The stomach, together with the bowels, was greatly distended with air. The calvarium exhibited throughout great density and a thickness amounting to about half an inch. The facial nerves were of unusual thickness. The auditory nerves, on the contrary, were shrivelled and destitute of narina. The accompanying arteries were dilated to more than the size of a crow quill and cartilaginous. The eustachian tube was much thickened and somewhat contracted about the osseous portion of the tube.
Now, experts have pored over these findings and tried to extrapolate what it is, but there's two almost competing theories behind this, and one is Occam's razor.
Oh, that's my favourite. I live by Occam's razor. It's something like it's futile to do with more than what could be done with fewer.
And Occam's razor applies to so many different areas. The problem with Occam's razor in this is biology, evolution and diseases don't have to make sense. And that's the problem. Nothing has to be efficient.
It's outside of the realm of logic, isn't it?
That's right. There's a whole heaps of things that happen in biology that make no sense whatsoever, but it is. And this is where sometimes pathology falls into it. And, why have 3 diagnoses when one will suffice? Yes, okay. But a patient is possibly just as likely to have those 3 diagnoses. And this is a conclusion that can be explained. And I guess as the older we get, there's now another theory that comes in. It's called Hickham's dictum.
Patients can have as many diseases as they damn well please.
And so you have to balance it. And this is why, if we could sum up Beethoven, his diseases in one, then Occam's razor says, well, it has to be that one. And then if you look at Hickham's dictum, you're saying, well, no, he can have as many as he wants. And so that's where we start to balance it. Let's have a look. And, what is the question? The question is, well, what was his cause of death? And so he could have had a lot of diseases, and many commentators have spoken. One that keeps on coming up, and we've already done this, and in the historical defamer is syphilis. People say,
yes.
Did he have syphilis, or he could have had it? Was it a cause of death? Well, if could have he had it? Well, look, almost anyone in history can have other disease that you could label. But was it a cause of death? Well, for it to be a cause of death, it would have had to have been in the tertiary stage. Now, this is where, in syphilis, you get involvement of the cardiovascular system and neurosyphilis, which, cardiovascular disease, heart failure, neurosyphilis, we're talking about a generalized paralysis, hypertonia. We don't have any evidence of that in this instance. Could have he had it? Yeah, but it's a complete guess. But it's not a cause of his... the evidence doesn't fit for it to be a cause of his death. And so, okay, well, let's look at his bone and hair analysis that they've done. Someone had a lock of hair, and there's a whole interesting scenario of someone acquiring the hair. Well, they then tested the hair. Well, it turns out he had huge levels of lead in his hair. So people are going, well, where would have this lead come from? Well, possibly from the wine, and the goblet that he drank from was laced with lead, and we have sugar of lead.
That's true, isn't it?
And so maybe they used it to sweeten the wine, and over time he became, got lead poisoning. But again, we're looking at symptoms of lead. Does this fit? Well, there's constipation, abdominal pain, anemia, headache, fatigue, difficulty concentrating. Yeah, but it's probably most likely a chronic process that this lead was there. Did he have, altered conscious state because, this is the level that it goes to in acute lead poisoning? And so it's like, well, it's there, but it doesn't look like it's a cause of death. From my perspective, people could argue otherwise, but it looks like he was probably had chronic lead poisoning, possibly, but was it at that level? Was he tolerated? And we don't know. No.
I would defer to you on this one, Dr. Travis
Brown. It doesn't look like lead poisoning. It is not on my top. Yes, it's there, but I wouldn't put it down as the cause of death. And there's an interesting diagnosis that came up, recently about, Paget's disease. Now, Paget's disease is also called osteitis deformans. Now, this is a bone remodeling disease. And you get overgrowth of bones. Sometimes it's in one area, it's single, 15% of Paget's disease is a single bone is affected. but the majority is multiple sites. And this is what happens is the bone remodels. It causes a lamellar bone, often in places like the skull, the spine, and the pelvis. But the majority of the patients are asymptomatic, but it happens in about 2 to 9% of the population. Prevalence, for whatever reason, is decreasing at the moment. We don't know why. And it causes things like pathological fractures and can even cause deafness. So, could this be? Well, could be. But the other really competing diagnosis here for his deafness is something called otosclerosis. Now, this is a bony overgrowth of the footplate of the stapes in the ear, and this causes tinnitus, balance problems, and occurs in about 1 in every 200 people. We have a good treatment for this now if we know what's going on, but back then you wouldn't have. And that brings us to, well, which is more likely? Well, Paget's typically happens in people over the age of 50. Otosclerosis typically happens in young people, in mid-adulthood. Mm-hmm. And so when did Beethoven start complaining of these symptoms?
Wasn't he was 27 or thereabouts?
That's right. And so when on the balance of things, it's like, well, what is it? It's much more likely to be otosclerosis than Paget's disease. And so it fits really nicely into that category. Now, is that cause of death? No, but it will most likely explain his deafness. And then we come to the bowel problems that he's having. Now, he has diarrhea and pain. This all begins at the age of less than 30. In fact, seems to happen the most around when after his mother passes away and then progresses throughout life. Now, the diagnosis most people say is this was ulcerative colitis. And those symptoms fit. But the problem is he didn't have any issues with bleeding or passing blood. And as is inherent in the name, ulcerative, you don't have to, but it's pretty mild if you don't have passing blood and bloody stools. And so what we're looking at then is, well, did he really have ulcerative colitis? Well, from the autopsy findings, they said distended bowel. Usually if you've got something that's inflamed and thickened and happened for 30 plus years, it will be thick, it will be kind of rigid, and you'll have like large lymph nodes. You get these specimens all the time, refractory or not responsive to treatment, because these patients are at risk of getting malignancy from the inflammation, and so they remove it. We don't have any findings of that. We don't have we have a distended bowel, but we don't have a really thickened, inflamed, something that would cause someone pain for 30 years. And so ulcerative colitis doesn't quite fit. And so if we're looking at the symptoms, it's probably an inflammatory bowel syndrome as opposed to inflammatory bowel disease. And so if we're looking at all of this, bringing it all together for, Ludwig van Beethoven, if we combine Occam's razor and, Hickham's dictum, we have a pancreas that is firm and hard, probably due to chronic pancreatitis. We have abdominal pain that is somewhat alleviated by alcohol. We have a liver that has a nodular surface, and this is where people go, well, it wasn't micronodular, which is classic for alcohol, related, but micronodular can become macronodular over time. And that's where
early stages. But.
And so it's gone through maybe quite advanced. We also have skin petechiae, and this is where we get acute liver failure symptoms. So then what did he die from? Well, look, the signs are right in front of us. He actually died from liver failure, from hepatic or liver cirrhosis, on a background of chronic pancreatitis. And it's most likely due not only from his own drinking, but also a family history of alcohol-related disease. And so this is where all those other, interesting diagnoses such as syphilis and lead, I don't think lead, but ulcerative colitis, Paget's disease, probably not. And we're probably looking at someone who died from the drink.
Dun, 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 dun. Thank you. That was absolutely fascinating and a little bit bleak. So I'm going to lock myself in a room now and just listen to Ode to Joy. This Medical Life is recorded in the Talked About Marketing Studios in Adelaide. For show notes and more information about the podcast, visit thismedicallife.com.au. You can contact the hosts via Twitter. Dr. Travis Brown is at Dr. Travis Brown. That's DR for doctor. And Steve Davis is at Steve Davis. Editing and production is by Tim Whiffen. Design is by Tom Buzenjut. This has been a PathNotes Proprietary Limited production.
Life is uncertain. It's okay to feel stressed, anxious, worried, or frustrated. It's normal. With CalHope's free and secure mental health resources, it's easy to get the help you and your loved ones need when you need it the most. Call our warm line at 833-317-4673 or live chat at calhope.org today.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.